Ladies, gentlemen, everyone who's showing up today, you are about to have a massive treat. We have the one and only Samantha Beth Karlin on today's episode of Clutching Our Pearls. Samantha is, okay, I'm going to run y'all through a laundry list because there is some badassery that is happening here that, one, you need to know where she came from, and two, you need to know where she's going, because this is the kind of person that changes the world. Samantha is the CEO of Empower Global, and they facilitate training on DEI and gender issues, specifically in the Fortune 500 company world. Empower also runs groundbreaking Women's Leadership Challenge. A scrap 5, 4, 3, 2. Empower also runs a groundbreaking Women's Leadership Challenge for small business groups of women leaders from around the world. Some of Empower's clients include Slalom, Hiscox, Amazon, Insight Partners, Verizon, just to name a few. She speaks and does training like absolutely all over the world, including Harvard University and Tufts and EI University, Indian Institute for Management. And, she's also kind of a TEDx speaker. She is the badass host of Samanthropolitics, a cutting-edge talk show about global politics and women's rights, where she interviews DC heavyweights about foreign policy. And God bless her, because that takes some absolute chutzpah. Previously, Samantha led global engagement for a Silicon Valley tech company, led Ashoka's programming with women social entrepreneurs, built coalitions for Hillary for America campaign, and managed the Women's Issues portfolio for the U.S. Embassy in Sarajevo, BIH. Ms. Karlin holds a Master's of Arts in Law and Diplomacy with a specialization in global gender analysis and conflict resolution from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I'm doing that whole thing again.
Yep.
5, 4, 3, 2. Previously, Samantha led global engagement for a Silicon Valley tech company, led Ashoka's programming with women social entrepreneurs, built coalitions for the Hillary for America campaign, and managed the Women's Issues portfolio for the U.S. Embassy in Sarajevo, BIH. Ms. Karlin holds a Master's of Arts in Law and Diplomacy with a specialization in global gender analysis and conflict resolution from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. She is a trained mediator and speaks Spanish fluently, and she has also been published in the Washington Post, Conscious Company magazine, and Woman 2.0, and is a New America expert. So, welcome to Clutching Our Pearls. It sounds as if you've been awfully busy.
Always, Marie, always. Busy planning the revolution like you. We're sisters.
And luckily, the world keeps giving you a lot of hot sauce to keep the fuel burning.
Yeah, I don't know if it's lucky. I wish we were not dealing with mainly Roe v. Wade right now, but unfortunately we are.
We are in the thick of it. And from everything that we hear from not only our listeners, but those that are out there trying to make a change is let's face it, at first we were all kind of gobsmacked, even though we knew that it had been leaked and we knew it was coming. I don't think anybody really knew that it was going to happen for real, or at least there was an emotional holdback that this can't possibly really go through. As people are starting to come out of that fog and realize, nope, this shit is here, and if we're not going to do something about it, who is? How do they start taking the first steps? Because it feels like such an unclimbable mountain.
So, I think what's important when you think about creating institutional change, and I talk about this in my women's leadership class, is like, where are you uniquely equipped to help? Okay, so there's a million different ways that you can help. So, for example, you can offer your house to somebody who's seeking an abortion. You can donate to a million different abortion funds. You can put pressure on your company to speak out against anti-choice measures and tell your company to make a public statement about abortion. You can have your company provide travel for abortions. You can donate and volunteer for pro-choice candidates running for office. You can run for office. You can encourage your friends and your network to run for office and to vote for pro-choice candidates. You can talk about your abortion story. You can talk to your daughter about safe sex and, God forbid, buy her a vibrator. And help your kids understand what safe sex is. You can pressure your legislators to abolish abstinence-only sex education. You can pressure your senators to abolish the filibuster. I think that's just a small laundry list of things that you can do, but there's something for everyone. You can share your own story. So
how do people, because the hardest part is we know that there's a million different ways that we can interact with our government. Some of it feels fruitful, some of it really doesn't. But where can people go to find resources on how to get started, or even just how to, when they've identified within themselves their what, where do they go for the how and the where?
Well, I'm really excited, Marie, because we're currently, and when I say we, it's graduates and alumni of the Women's Leadership Challenge, which is the feminist leadership program I teach. There's a group of us that are basically coming together to create a website that will be a comprehensive resource of different types of not just abortion funds, but all different sorts of advocacy groups working around abortion. So you can look in the drop-down menu and say, okay, I want to look for reproductive justice, or I want to look at storytelling initiatives, or I want to look at specific to New Mexico, the organizations that are operating within that. We'll also have podcasts and resources for you to learn more. We'll have a list of vetted pro-choice candidates that we actually think have a shot at winning, based upon one of our alumni, Olivia Logan, who is a consultant for progressives running for office, who's going to create a list of candidates for us that she thinks actually have a shot at winning, so that you know where to donate. We're going to have easy ways for you to be able to be in touch with your congresspersons and senators, easy ways to volunteer. So I would just say we don't have the URL yet, because this has literally just been in the making. But I would say, if that's something that you're interested in learning more, is to text the word empower, EMPOWER, to 66866. That's empower to 66866. And then it'll text you back and say, do you want to be added to our mailing list? And you enter with your email so that you can get access to that. And then hopefully by the time this is published, we'll have the actual URL and we can throw it in the show notes. But what we created it because it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's time that we all stop feeling helpless.
Exactly.
And start putting ourselves into a place where, even if it is a small action, we are taking those consistent actions. And we've got to remember that we're 51% of the fucking population. And even though it is easy for them to tell us that we don't have a voice, the truth is we do, especially when we stand together.
Yeah, especially when we stand together. And the other thing that we've been kind of thinking about is protesting, I think, is helpful. You can let out lots of rage protesting. But I had an interesting talk with someone yesterday about how we're not doing the type of protesting that's hurting the economy. That maybe we need to think about boycotting any brand that doesn't cover abortion access, or doing a work walkout where we don't go to work for a week, or we all stop taking the buses and the trains on a certain day, like something that actually has an economic effect, because our country doesn't seem to listen unless it's about economics. So there's something I've been thinking about.
Well, and listen, I am going to love to hear the final formulation of those thoughts. I was raised a union kid, and I remember not passing picket lines. You didn't do it. There was no way that you would walk past somebody who you knew was not being treated fairly, just so that you could get, I lived in Vegas at the time, into a freaking casino. And we've lost that collective sensibility of, no, I'm going to stand up for you and we're going to stand up together. And I'm definitely not pro-union, because I, have seen how much it degrades different parts of family units in society. But I am 100% pro showing the fuck up.
Yeah.
And making a difference. And when you see someone out there that is dedicated to moving the needle forward, the first thing you can do is find out how to support that person and what relationships and opportunities you can build to move the entire experience forward. And then we have to insist on actual change.
Yeah. And then, I mean, ultimately, we have to reelect state legislatures, because what this has done is it's taken, unless we, our options are either to elect 2 more senators, get the filibuster to be abolished, and then pack the Supreme Court, and pack meaning add justices to the Supreme Court, or we have to get rid of these state legislatures who are these conservative jerks who I don't really just care about oppressing women. They clearly don't care about the economy, because if more women who can't afford it have kids, then, they say they're fiscal conservatives. That's a laugh, because once more women start having kids, there's going to be who can't support them. There's going to be more people on welfare, and that's going to go in their face. And, what we have to get rid of these, they're very male dominated, very conservative, very religious state legislatures. And that means people have to run for office. People have to donate. People have to volunteer at the state level. Like, don't just go and volunteer for the presidential candidate. They have enough help. I worked for Hillary. We had a lot of help. Did I need you? Yes. But you know what? Some of the state level people need you more. And to educate yourself. Like, if you don't know who your state legislature is right now, go find out. Who is in charge of your district? You probably don't. A lot of people don't know.
Right. Right. And I will say that myself, I did not connect to politics until I had to. To me, it was overwhelming, and I had businesses to run, and I was making change in my own right. And being a high dominant and a very fast mover, I tend to like to function in places where I don't have a lot of bureaucracy, and that does not exist in the governmental world. So it's impressive as hell to me that you've got not only the kind of drive that you have, but that you've got the ability to cut through that red tape and have the patience to not kill people in the process. But we are no longer in a place where we have the luxury of not knowing. If your head is stuck in the sand right now, you are going to start to be part of the problem. And if there is anything that I can say to encourage our listeners to simply take one step, it's going to be find out who your governmental leaders are in your area, and find out your place, because we all have a place. And speaking of us all having a place, one of the things that you and I originally connected on were the concepts of female leadership and the absolute befuddlement of the Great Resignation, which I think for you and I, we weren't befuddled at all. We absolutely had a clear vision of what was going down and why it was going down. And I was frankly gobsmacked when in January of 2021, I was saying, hey, listen, Carol is not going to want to go back and work for the first single white guy that walked by and took her job and is now making more money than she is. And oh, by the way, she lost for every 6 months she was out, she lost 5 years of seniority in her role. So let me go back and work for Kevin, do my job and his job, and make less money. There's no way. And so I had this conversation for about 3 months before I was like, screw everybody, I'm going to fix it myself. I would love to hear your POV on not only what sparked the Great Resignation, but what is continuing to fuel that fire.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Marie. So I was not surprised at all. Like you said, it was like, this is not rocket science. People want to be treated as full human beings. And that means that they take care of their bodies. That means that they take care of themselves. That means that they are appreciated and valued. That means that they are respected. That means they are not sexually harassed. That means that they are listened to and their voices are heard. That means that they are paid equally for equal work. I mean, why is this rocket science? That, I still don't understand how women can be paid less for the same job in 2022 just because they have a vagina. Like it's like, what? Like, how have we not had legislation to get rid of this at this point? It's crazy to me. And so if you look at what sparked the Great Resignation, obviously it was this thoughtful period. It was this period where people were stepping back, they were isolated mostly, and they were starting to think about, what do they really want? And that's why I had a lot of women sign up for my women's leadership course, because they were like, I'm not happy. I don't feel appreciated or valued or respected in my workplace. I'm underpaid. This is not like, this is what I've been doing, but it's not necessarily what is true to me and what I value. And then the other thing that's obviously huge is the burden of care. I mean, that has not gone away. Obviously, millions of women, I think it was 20 million women left the workforce during COVID to take care of kids and or elderly parents. And yes, schools are back in session mostly, but every time there's a COVID scare, people are out of schools. You can't have the nanny come, because if you can afford a nanny, because they're, might get COVID, you can't send a kid to daycare. So guess who takes on the burden? 80% of working mothers and 30% of working fathers. So in terms of women, it falls to women to be the caretakers. So you also have that aspect of women realizing, I'm working an extra full-time job in addition to my normal job, just doing unpaid care work. And I don't want to do that anymore because I'm going out of my mind. And,
Yeah. Yeah. And then, we expect that. I think the hard part for me was that there was the expectation that they would, one, want to come back to the way that things were. No, don't be stupid. Two, that there was no consideration for the fact that they had just taken an entire generation of women, maybe 2 generations, and said, oh, thank you for doing what we asked you to do for 20 years, but you're disposable now.
Yeah.
And have them come back and not have feelings about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And what the research is showing, Marie, in terms of like why, like statistically speaking, why people left in the Great Resignation, what it's showing is that for women specifically, it's a lack of managerial support, burnout linked to burden of care, and it's a lack of opportunities for advancement and a lack of being promoted. And again, going back to equal pay. So, if you're not, and then if you add to that for everybody, the things that were said in this study was a toxic work culture, a lack of attention to diversity inclusion, feeling of being undervalued and disrespected. So put all that together, yikes. Like, do you want to work in that work environment? Like, I don't.
Right. It's amazing what happens when we're not so busy that we have a chance to actually think about what we want, as opposed to doing what we were told we were supposed to. And I think one of the things that always comes up for me when we're talking about the feminist movement and, even just the strides that we had made and then lost. I mean, we lost 40 years in the first 6 months of the pandemic. Is that every time you are in a room with a woman, and I don't care if you're a male, female, whatever, if you're not part of the conversation saying, excuse me, she wasn't done speaking.
Right.
Or why isn't she getting paid the same as I am? Or, you know what? I will go in and help you ask for that raise if I need to. We are part of what is reversing all of the strides that have been made in the feminist movement. When you don't ask for that raise, when you don't demand your worth, it degrades all of those little steps.
Yeah.
And that's a really hard pill to swallow, because it feels like we're going to be fighting for the rest of our lives.
Yeah. That being said, Marie, I think it also, it's funny. I was talking about this in class last night with the women. women tend to act more not for themselves, but for their community, because we're taught to build and preserve relationships. So actually, that frame sometimes actually helps women to stand up. If I say, you're not standing up for yourself, Marie, when you argue for your salary, you're standing up for all women. And so I had a woman who just got a job as the professor of national security at Duke University, who graduated my program. She was interviewing during the program, and she said, they gave me an offer and I was going to take it because I don't really need the money. And then I realized, because of my class, that if I take that money, which was kind of like that salary, which was not that great, I'm now setting the bar for other adjunct professors. And the salaries for adjuncts is already abysmally poor, which is literally the only reason I don't teach at the university. Because I love college kids. I'd be a great freaking professor. It's the only reason, because the pay is literally abysmal. It's not livable, which is a reflection on our education system. But that's a whole nother thing. But if you embolden people to realize that they are part of that solution, it also helps them to abandon their own personal fear, because they realize they're part of a movement. It's not just about them and getting what they deserve or climbing their own ladder. It's about all of us, and that we have to literally, like, if you can envision like a row of women just like holding each other's hands and just like picking each other up. And then if you have men also picking us up as well, we're going to rise. But if you have people beating each other down the ladder or not helping up the ladder, we're all going to flail around at the bottom of the ladder.
Yeah.
And cry about it, frankly.
And I think that's it's beautifully said. And there are so many small moments, I think, within our careers and within our lives where we deserve to be selfish. And we're not good at it. We're not good at being selfish at home. We're not good at being selfish when it comes to our careers. And I don't necessarily believe that being selfish is a bad thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Marie, like I don't actually, I like to correct the frame. I wouldn't use the word selfish, because, like, for example, one thing that there's a book called Centered Leadership by Joanna Barsh, and literally one of the pillars of centered leadership for her is regeneration. It's having moments to pause, to know. I always say to my ladies, like, what regenerates you? Because as leaders, we're going through some tough stuff and dealing with a lot of emotional things, both personally, and if we're leading a team. I mean, the things that I've dealt with this year, like the war in Ukraine, I had a student from Ukraine, cancer, like Roe v. Wade, like all this stuff that's like pretty emotionally difficult, especially because I work on DEI.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out, how do I recenter? Because this stuff is upsetting. And so I think it's not about being selfish. It's realizing, like, that's a pillar of leadership, is regeneration.
And thank you very much for that reframe. I think I was looking at it through the frame of the common perception from others.
Yep.
Excuse me.
But like what you're saying, like, women have trouble taking time for themselves, especially because we have, I don't have children, but women who do have kids or spouses or whatever, everyone's always needing something. And so that's another thing I teach in my course, is about setting boundaries. Where do you have trouble setting boundaries, and why? And how do you set those boundaries in a way, like, I teach women to say, when they say no, to say, I'd love to help you, but I just don't have the bandwidth for that right now. It's not like, screw you. It's just like, oh, absolutely, but no, not in my wheelhouse. Or, no, I'm not taking notes of that meeting, because you know what? I've never seen Larry take notes, and he's a great note taker. And you pay me too much for me to take notes. So do you want to waste the money that you're paying me on me taking notes or ordering food for lunch tomorrow?
Yeah, you have a much softer delivery than I have. But I think there's so much in what you just said about being able to frame things so that we stay out of that. I mean, I'm flashing back to Jane Fonda and when the word feminist became weaponized. feminist was man-hating and this, that, and the other, which is the absolute antithesis of feminism, which is absolutely inclusive. For God's sakes, we make every human on earth. Why would we not include them? Right? Let's look at it from a place of reality. I'm curious as to, we've been in the Great Resignation for, is it two years now? Almost a year and a half, maybe?
Well, I wouldn't say that the first period was resignation because a lot of people were forced to leave. Like in terms of the great, like when people are actually making the choice to leave, I would say that's within the last year or so.
Yeah. So we had the Great Recession, or the feminine recession, the diversity recession, and then we moved into the resignation. We still see help wanted signs absolutely everywhere. If we've got the opportunity to engage in, and listen, we all know that it could be the same exact show with a different sign out front. What do you believe is preventing people from re-engaging at the level that we're seeing right now?
They want to be treated with basic human decency. They don't want to work 80-hour work weeks. They want to spend time with their children. I mean, again, like this stuff is not rocket science. Like the restaurant industry, okay? I am not surprised people didn't go back to the restaurant industry. When I was in my early years in New York, I was a bartender, and the way that I was treated was literally abysmal. From being harassed to being touched inappropriately behind the bar, to the manager taking tips off the top, to a kid throwing up on my check so that I couldn't leave a tip, to not being tipped at all because people weren't from there. And when I said, I just gave a $300 table, like my whole salary is tips. And they said, you're fired. You can't question why they don't give tips. I'm like, no, it's just because we need to add a mandatory tip because they're European. Europeans aren't used to getting tipped. And I was fired because the customer is always right. I mean, like it was horrible. I had bartending jobs where I literally showed up to work and the restaurant was closed and nobody called me. It was closed for business. I had another job where we were totally restaffed. And again, nobody told us. We just weren't on the schedule. And I had jobs where they basically, there was this awful bar in DC where what they would do is, because they pay restaurant workers and bartenders so low, it's like $3 an hour, that they can afford to have 5 of us on at the same time. But if our whole salary is tips and pooling our tips, that means the more bartenders you have on, the less we make. But they could, they happily would throw on 6 bartenders, and then we would all walk home with, $50 each in tips, maybe after an 8-hour shift. And of course, when I said something, as I always do, it was like, well, we'll just replace you, right? It's like the mentality was so, and this is multiple bars. Like this happened everywhere. I had men wait for me at 3 a.m. after telling me that they were married and how much they love their kids, and wait for me outside the bar in New York City on the street after I left. It was scary. Like this was scary, Marie. So I'm just talking about that industry as, people are like, oh, why can't we get restaurant workers? Like, hello.
And I was, on the same token, I was just doing some research into the airline industry, and quite naturally, I went back through the progression of stewardesses and what was required of them, which was some epic bullshit, from the size of your ass to how you were allowed to speak to the men that were blatantly groping you. And we forward that to, the woman that actually started I think they call it, I'm losing the word now, but basically the framework with which flight attendants work now, that changed the whole thing.
Their Bill of Rights or something.
I know it's not the Bill of Rights, but I'm not finding the word. Everything that she fought for, still, it improved the abuse, but it didn't improve the quality of life. And we're watching all of these pilots and all of these flight attendants who are now taking health risks on a daily basis, physical safety risks because people no longer behave appropriately. within airplanes. I'm not sure why that sets them off, but it seems like there's been an explosion. And we sit and we wonder, why were all the flights canceled during the 4th of July?
I literally, Marie, I'm no joke. I was on a flight. This is like 3 months ago, and a guy was cursing at his girlfriend or the girl he was with. I mean, but so loudly that the whole plane could hear it. So then the flight attendant came over and he berated the flight attendant and just started cursing at him. We're in the air. So like, what do you do? So of course I stick my nose in because I'm like, I'm not going to stand for a woman getting abused. And there's little kids on the plane that can hear it. What happened? He threatened to punch me in the face and came after me. And I mean, and I felt terrible for the flight attendant because he was being berated by this man. And then it was dealt terrible. Like I left the plane. An air marshal helped me off the plane, but then I ran into the guy again at security. They weren't able to arrest him. Apparently they should have taken him into custody. They didn't because he didn't actually assault me. But the whole thing was dealt with in this horrendous way. So yeah, I mean, I get it. It's like people are realizing they would rather be in a job where they don't have to take risks. They're not berated by people because someone doesn't want to wear his mask because he's a jerk. And they can have better work-life balance and spend more time with their families.
And so if you were to do a little prognostication and look into the future, what are the things that you see either changing or completely dissembling?
Yeah. So one thing was within diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think that this is a really promising development where, after George Floyd was murdered, all of these companies started to say, oh my God, we have no idea what to do. And they started hiring heads of diversity, equity, and inclusion for their companies. It started with, we just want more people of color and women. Right. And so unfortunately, a lot of heads of DEI will come in, and that's the mandate. It's about recruitment. Go get heads of DEI and women. But more and more DEI heads are now pushing back. We're saying it's not just about diversity because we can get diverse talent in here. But if we don't create an inclusive environment, if the men are still going to the strip club for their team bonding, guess what? The women are going to quit. Or if people are still getting subjected to racist epithets, or not even racist epithets, but like hostility because of their race or, microaggressions, like they're going to quit. So now I've seen more and more heads of DEI really talk about inclusion and belonging and how do you cultivate spaces. And I love this terminology by a leadership practitioner and friend, Adi Vaught. He says, how can we not just create environments where people feel like they belong, but where human beings can flourish? I think that's the next step. And that's where feminist leadership goes, is like, how do we create optimal environments for people to truly achieve their potential and give to the world in the way that they uniquely are meant to give to the world, versus just being put into some category in some lane and given a mandate, regardless of their strengths or who they are, and potentially discriminated against. So I think I am seeing, like I was just talking to a head of global DEI for a big consulting firm the other day, and she's getting headcount under her and she's getting more money because people are interested and they're doing culture and belonging surveys and trying to understand why people feel like they don't belong or they're not enjoying work, and they genuinely are trying to improve things. I think that that's a big trend we're seeing. The other trend we're seeing, and I run into this a lot, is that we can no longer leave politics outside of work.
There's a deep breath around that one, because right now everybody is completely terrified to bring anything up.
They are, but then you see people like the head of Dick's Sporting Goods being like, hey, we're going to provide this. She was one of the first ones. We're going to provide this amount of care for women who need to travel out of state to get abortions. We're seeing people post on their LinkedIns. I mean, this used to be the place where we just posted like 5 ways to get your manager to like you. Really heartfelt stories about miscarriages and being denied care. And, I think it's beautiful because people are real humans and we can't deny what's going on. And I think that was one positive of COVID, is that exposed that like we were all grieving in that period. We all knew someone who died from COVID or had a family member who was really ill. We were terrified. We were isolated. And the human experience became so bad that it became hard to ignore how bad it was. Whereas in the past, it's like, how are you? I'm fine. Cool. I'm fine too. How was your weekend? Great. Okay, moving on. You can't deny that things are hard for people anymore. And I think that that's given a realness to our world that is beautiful. But the question is, how do companies embrace that, or do they? And do leaders step up to the challenge? And do leaders get the type of training? This is why I do leadership training for companies, because most companies have no leadership training. They spend more money teaching their managers how to manage Excel spreadsheets and their employees' time than they do leading and empowering people and lifting up and teaching and coaching and problem solving and dealing with difficult issues. It's like I went to the leadership industry because I was like, what? Like, this is like, no one's doing this.
And I think you and I come from very similar cloth, because I have always been in the small business world. At this point, I mean, it's been 20 years. I'm completely unemployable. There's no place that I'm going to work besides owning a business. And when I was at my breaking point, I was lucky enough to have a girlfriend that reached in and said, "You've been an entrepreneur since you were 22. When did you stop making choices for yourself?"
Mm.
And it gave me a moment to breathe and say, "Oh, wait, I have lost everything." And at that point, I had lost the love of my life, my best friend, my freedom, and my sense of self. And remembering that I had choices was the first step to regaining that space. And as I began to regain that space, I saw the feminine recession happen. And I kind of had this, oh, hell no moment. Like, no, like not on my watch. And realizing that as I processed through that, which took a lot of tequila, that we needed to care for the whole person first, because we were going to have a lot of people that were coming through who had been told that they had a voice until it actually mattered. And then they were dismissed, they were marginalized, and they were told to get back in the frickin' kitchen. And then we can help them build on their professional skills and start to do what they love again and what they were passionate about in the first place. And create that work environment, whether it's virtual or whether it's in a live setting, where they can create the kind of life-work balance that works for them, because what works for their life is not going to work for the next person's life. If you are caring for a parent who is in home hospice and an 8-year-old, you are going to have needs that are different than someone else's. And we are blessed in a knowledge-rich country of people who are authentically out there changing the world and providing resources for those that are going through the things that are unimaginable and that seem insurmountable at any given moment. As feminist leaders, we have the unique ability to see what the emotional needs are, as well as what the gross needs are, to be able to match those with people that are providing high quality services. That's going to change lives. That's how you lift your people up. And you give them the choices that they need to be truly engaged with their career, their lives, and their futures. And so I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to talk today. I want to make sure that our listeners know about your upcoming leadership courses, because that is simply something that, if you have the opportunity in any capacity to join one of Samantha's cohorts, make sure that you find a way. She has one coming up in at the beginning of the fall and then mid-fall. We will make sure to include those dates in our follow-up notes. You can find Samantha at Empower Global on Facebook and on Instagram. On LinkedIn, it's Samantha Karlin, Karlin. And her two websites are empowerglobal.net and womensleadershipchallenge.com. We have a world to change, and our voices matter. In August, Forward Revolution is going to be taking to the streets of Chicago to remind people of all of those voices that were silenced through our Read Our Lips campaign. We encourage you to follow the hashtag Read Our Lips, join Samantha's leadership training events, follow her on the socials, because I'm sure there's going to be value there beyond what you would anticipate. But more than anything, make sure that you find your place. Make sure that you take the steps forward that you can take, and that you stay informed and engaged. Samantha, is there any closing thought that you would like to leave our audience with?
I would just say for the women here to recognize that also part of feminist leadership is that recognizing that for so long we've been told that to be a leader means to be a man, or it means to act like a man. It doesn't matter if we have more women at the top if they just act like men. That's what I call the reperpetuation of the patriarchy. So I just wanted to seize that last point you were saying is about our understanding of emotions. One of the reasons that COVID countries under women did better is because women leaders in moments of crisis tend and befriend, and they act more pro-social, whereas men actually acted more internal in moments of crisis. This is our superpower. And so I think I would just say, if you're a woman listening, to encourage you to question a lot of those patriarchal norms and rules and to push against them, because we need your voice. We need your superpowers.
Thank you so much for spending time with us. Thank you for all of the work that you have done and the work that you will continue to do. I know that I am a little on fire right now because I started an entire nonprofit in 3 months, and it's been up and running for a year and a half, and I still feel like there is so much more work to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I deeply appreciate your ability to help us cut through some of the malaise and the fog that hits when you go through something like losing your rights as a human, to be able to take action.
And you have to take action. I mean, the best way to cut through that helplessness is into that feelings of despair is to take action. And that's where, another thing women have been taught is not to be angry. Limiting our anger fuels revolutions. We have to be angry. And so use that anger, use that despair, and channel it to help, and not to sit there just saying, woe is me, because that won't get us anywhere. So absolutely, Marie. And I really want to thank you so much for giving me this forum to talk about this, for raising important issues on your show, for fighting back, for also being a brilliant entrepreneur that's doing all sorts of amazing things for the world, for mobilizing your audience. I feel so blessed to be connected with you.
We've got a world to change. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for listening to Clutching Our Pearls. Welcome to the revolution.